Sometimes we get to dine with people that we know and we love. And sometimes we get to dine with people that we're uncertain of. You know how it is, like at the company Christmas party, and you have to go, and you know you're all going to be split up in this room, sitting at tables, eating together with your coworkers, and you're like, oh, what table am I going to be stuck at? But you have to go because it's your company, right? And you're the one who had the idea for the party. Or the wedding that you go to of a distant family member, a relative, or a friend, and you go and you see friends that are sitting at table 9, but when you check the table cards, you see that you're at table 2. And you're like, oh, gonna be a long night. Because sometimes we get to dine with people that we know and love, and other times we get to dine with those that we're uncertain of. And it's into this tension that Jesus comes and speaks. In the midst of being invited to a dinner party at the house of a prominent Pharisee, Jesus talks about those who are in the room and seeing some vie for attention while another is marginalized. Jesus is going to speak about who it is that we invite to our tables. Jesus today is going to lead us to ask this question: how do we use our table? And when it comes to opening up our table, who gets on the list? So grab your Bibles and turn with me to the Gospel of Luke in the New Testament, Luke chapter 14. We've been in the Gospel of Luke throughout this series, and we've been looking at snapshots of Jesus at the table and Jesus' radical hospitality, his willingness to come and to dine with those who are far from God in order to use the table to bring them nearer. And today we see Jesus invited to yet another dinner party where today he makes this point and settles this tension about those that we choose to dine with. So pick it up with me in Luke chapter 14, beginning at verse 1. If you don't have it in front of you, we'll put it on the screens. Luke writes, "Now one Sabbath, when he, Jesus, went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, 'Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?' But they remained silent. And then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, 'Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?' And they could not reply to these things." So Luke opens the story for us, and he sets the scene, or the table, if you will. Jesus has been invited into the home to be the guest of a prominent Pharisee, the ruler of the Pharisees. And it's here at this house that it says that the Pharisees were watching him carefully. Last week we talked about how Jesus didn't just choose to dine with those who loved him and were easy to love or love him back. Jesus chose to dine with those who were opposed to him, and no one was more opposed to him than the Pharisees, constantly plotting and seeking to trap him and trick him so that ultimately they might kill him. Jesus chooses to dine even with his enemies. He fulfills the words of Psalm 23 that you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Jesus is living out the very thing that he's going to call us to do in a moment. Over and over again in the Gospels, though, we read that the Pharisees are constantly seeking a way to trap Jesus in his own words, to trap him in ministry, to catch him in the act. And this moment in particular affords them one such opportunity. As Luke noted at the beginning of verse 1, it is the Sabbath day. And the Sabbath day, and here in the middle of the room, is a man who has dropsy. They know Jesus' propensity to heal and to heal on the Sabbath. And according to Jewish thought, on this, the holy day, a day of rest, they viewed work is illegal on the Sabbath, and in particular, Jesus' work of healing they determined to be wrong. And so they've set the trap. This is not coincidence, let me remind you, not coincidence at all. First of all, you have a prominent Pharisee who is hosting a big dinner party in his home on the Sabbath. If you're really seeking to keep the Sabbath, you don't invite a ton of guests over on the Sabbath. But then secondly, not only that, but at the center of the room, in the home of a prominent Pharisee, they have placed an impure man, a man who is sick with dropsy. His body is taking on fluid. His limbs are puffy. It's obvious just from appearance that he is ill. And in that culture, in the first century, the thinking was if you are ill, you are unclean. And they put this man right at the center of the room in the house of a religious leader who wouldn't want uncleanness in his home on the Sabbath. This is not coincidence. Jesus sees this man, and Jesus reads the room. And he says to them, is it lawful, verse 3, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And no one says a word. And so Jesus looks at the man, and he heals him, and he sends him off. And then in the midst of the silence, Jesus turns to them in verse 5 and he says, which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? And for the second time, the room goes silent. The text says they could not reply. You can feel the tension in the room. Jesus has just had a mic drop moment. That which of you, if your own son or your prized possession ox fell into a well on the Sabbath, would not stop what you were doing and work to get him out? And in fact, the Old Testament law of the Sabbath made allowance for such cases as these. Jesus is, in effect, saying in this moment that if it were your own child, you would do it and fish him out. And so if you would do it for your own child, why won't you do it for a child of God? If you do it for your own child, why would you not do it for a child of God? You do whatever it takes to save your child. Do whatever it takes to save a prized possession. And Jesus in this moment is effectively saying that I have come and God has sent me to do whatever it takes to reach his children. And yet you've not only rejected me, you are ignoring God's call. Because this man with dropsy was a child of God. The room is just quiet at this. Jesus has come in Luke chapter 14 to teach us something about who we should be reaching, who we should be inviting to the table. But he's not done teaching. Pick the text back up with me at verse 7. Now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. He who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. And then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So Jesus teaches a parable. Really, we're going to see today, Jesus teaches two parables. This first parable is to the guests at this party. The second parable will be given to the host later on. But Jesus teaches this parable because Jesus has been noticing something in the room. This parable is designed to teach us and them about the posture that they should have at the table. Jesus says, when you're invited to a wedding feast, do not seek and vie for that place of honor at the table, lest you take that place of honor and then the host comes in and he demotes you down. See, here's the thing about Middle Eastern tables in the first century. We talked about these tables last week, how in our Western culture you sit at a table prim and proper, but in an Eastern culture the table would have three sides and they would recline at table. They would recline on their left arm and eat with the right. I received the best text message ever this past week when someone from our church texted me a picture of their kids all on top of the table, reclining on their left arm, eating with their right. Just like Jesus. See, this is how you would sit at these tables. But there's another thing about this Eastern tradition. See, where you sat says something about who you are. So the host would have his spot at the head of the table. Right next to him, on the left and the right, were the two most prestigious spots reserved for places of honor, the most important people in the room. And then it would cascade down from there. You can get a sense from the scene that Jesus is at the house of a prominent Pharisee. Your text may say the ruler of the Pharisees. This is the tip at the top of the religious elite. And so you can imagine that the people that he's invited over on the Sabbath aren't slumming it. They are the people who are also in the upper echelons of power in the religious system of Israel. And Jesus is noticing as they come in that they are vying to be near this, the place of honor, the head at the table. And Jesus steps in to correct them because he wants to teach us and them about our posture when we approach the table. It may seem like Jesus is saying, hey, be shrewd, be clever, be crafty. Like the way to do this is that you actually want to be extra humble and sit way down in the lowest point so that the host will come in and be like, my, you don't deserve to be down there because you're so-and-so. Come up here and sit with me. It would seem like Jesus is teaching a parable that's kind of like teaching us to be shrewd, like false humility so that we will be honored in front of everyone. Don't brag on yourself, but let others do it for you. That is not what Jesus is teaching at all. Jesus is seeing these people vie for horizontal honor. And he's saying, hey, when we come to the table, and in the kingdom that God has set up, we don't vie for horizontal honor because the real honor comes from above. And so when you come to the table, don't come seeking honor here on the horizontal. Come being a servant. Come being a servant and let God be the one who honors you. Church, so often in our lives, we're seeking horizontal honor. And so the things that we drive really matter. The things that we wear, we really put money into. The places that we live are important because we're seeking this horizontal honor. And in this moment, Jesus is saying, don't come in seeking horizontal honor because in the end, horizontal honor all fades away. And the only honor that matters, and the only honor that matters is the vertical. It comes from God alone. Jesus shares this parable to talk about our posture. See, a parable is just a short story with a spiritual point. And Jesus' spiritual point here is this, that when it comes to the table, you and I are called to be servants, not guests. When it comes to the table, our posture is to come as servants, not guests. And yet so often we come to the table and we think of what God has done for me, and I'm so happy to be here. We think of who we are, and we act as though we are guests and recipients. And when we come into this room, we act as guests and recipients. Whether the worship was what we liked that week, whether it was appropriate to us, as though you were the one we've gathered to worship. We come in as guests, but Jesus says, no. At my table, you come as servants, and you allow God to be the one to ultimately elevate your life. We don't treat our lives and we don't treat our tables as gifts for us to receive, but as things that God owns, that we are stewards and servants of. And so we do not vie for position. Instead, we take up a humble posture. See, the problem with this party is everyone is seeking honor, and no one was thinking of the man with dropsy at the center of the room. And so the one who is greatest comes in, and he humbles himself, and he takes up the posture of a servant, and he heals God's child. And he pulls him from the well. And this is to be our posture. But Jesus isn't finished. He has more to teach us about who we should be reaching. Pick it up with me now at verse 12. He said also, so the story is continuing, he said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So Jesus has told a parable to the guests. Now he turns and he speaks to the host. And he says, hey, here's the deal. When you throw a party, here's what your posture should be, and here's where your focus should be. It says, verse 12, when you give a dinner, do not invite the people who are easy and comfortable. Do not invite family and friends only, or invite people who are wealthy and have honor, lest they turn it around and invite you and you be honored by them. Because why? We shouldn't be seeking honor here. We're seeking a greater honor. Jesus is addressing the motives of our heart. He says, instead, when you give a feast, invite the poor, the lame, the crippled, the blind. This is an issue of motivation. See, first, Jesus is hitting at the motivation in our hearts that we tend to serve only those who are easy and lovely. So when you think of your table, when you think of Thanksgiving, when you have a few extra spots, who is it that you think of inviting? We invite those who are easy and lovely, those who will fit in around the table, those who have values like ours, those who won't bring values in front of our kids, that will, send our kids off out of the way. We bring in people that won't ask too much of us, people who aren't moving on Saturday and need a truck. No, we invite those who are easy and lovely. But Jesus says, watch the motive of your heart. When you throw a party, don't just invite those who are easy and lovely. And second, related to the motive of our heart, he says we tend to invite the easy and lovely because we tend to favor those who are favorable, and we tend to favor those who might show favor to us someday in return. Now, I understand Jesus' point here. When I was studying it this week, I'm like, yeah, I get that. Except I wrestled with it a little bit because I was like, I don't really feel like I do that, Jesus. Like, I get your point to the Pharisees. The Pharisees definitely did that. But Lord, I'm not a Pharisee. I don't just love people who would be favorable to me. And that's when Jesus was like, oh, really? Let's review the tape. And suddenly I'm confronted with the fact that I too am guilty of avoiding people in the lobby who I know will take too much of my time, as though it's my time to hold on to. I know that I'm guilty of avoiding people that I know will need help, and I've helped in the past, and that help has just led to more help and more requests and a spiraling domino avalanche of need. And the Lord has reminded me that, yes, I too am guilty, that I will love those who are favorable to me, those who won't be hard for me, those who might even be able to return a favor to me in the future. Jesus is getting at the motives of our hearts, speaking about those opportunities where we might be repaid, because we tend to avoid the people who constantly hit us up. But Jesus says, no, this is precisely why you are here. Those people have needs, and you are to invite them precisely because they have needs. And you've been placed here because you are a servant designed to care for this child of God. But Jesus has one more point to make, not just about our posture, but about those that we choose to invite to the table. So pick it up with me, the last stretch of the story, beginning at verse 15. When one of those who reclined at table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But Jesus said to him, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I bought a field and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I've married a wife and therefore I cannot come.'" Okay? So the servant came and reported these things to his master. And then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, "Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame." And the servant said, "Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room." And the master said to the servant, "Go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet." So Luke says that when Jesus mentions the kingdom previously, that this risk of being repaid at the resurrection of the just, verse 14. When he mentions the kingdom, he's made this spiritual point, and it's convicting, is it not? Questioning the motives of our hearts, questioning our posture and those that we're seeking and willing to invite to the table. When he mentions this, someone decides to break the awkwardness in the room, and so they shout out, "Well, blessed is everyone who will be at the kingdom, Jesus. Blessed is everyone who will be at this feast in the end." Now, if Jesus were spicy like me, he might be tempted in this moment to be like, "Dude, you are missing the point. I mean, here I am, the Son of God, standing in your midst with the power to heal, and you just witnessed it, and yet you are rejecting me. You don't even know God. So, dude, you're not even going to heaven. What are you doing talking about the kingdom?" But fortunately, Jesus is far more patient and kind than your loving fellow Canadian. Jesus instead teaches a parable, and he directs the parable really to the host. Again, speaking to the host and about how we host people at our table and who we are willing to host. It says in verse 16 that a man held a great banquet and he invited many. A great banquet, a man of means, and he invited many, but one by one, all of the guests begin to make excuses. He has sent out the evites. Everyone has clicked and responded and said they have a +1. And yet, though they know the time and the day of the feast, when the time and the day come, they all offer up excuses. I was reading one scholar and historian who argues that in that first century culture, to go to this much effort when meals and great banquets like this are such a prominent fixture in the culture, to accept an invitation and then go back on your word and not show up is like spitting in someone's face and kicking dust at them and starting a brawl. It is a literal act of war. So you understand why this man is hurt and angered. Because one by one, people are reneging on their commitments in a culture where your word and your commitment mattered. The first guy says, I've bought a field and I need to go check it out, because we all buy fields without ever seeing them. And the second says, well, I bought 5 yoke of oxen and I need to go check them out, because we've all bought yoke of oxen without ever looking at them. And the third one says, well, I just got married, so I cannot come. And clearly, this man has clearly just gotten married and knows nothing about women. Because if he did, he would know that his wife would probably love nothing more than to be invited to a big dinner that she doesn't have to cook at, right? A big party and I get to dress up and you're taking me out? Absolutely. Every single one by one, makes excuses. And Jesus says the master gets angry. He sends his servants. And what does he say? Verse 21, to go out and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and lame. Notice this is the second time that Jesus has pointed to this group of people. Just like the man who is standing at the center of the room at the beginning of the dinner. The one who is desperate in need. The one who reflected the image and the glory of God. A child of God. This man sends his servants to find God's children. And Jesus' point here is simple. Again, our lives are to be lived as servants. And the table is our tool. Everything that we have, our table, our homes, our jobs, is our tool. And our charge is to invite those who are far from God to come and see that the Lord is good. You and I are not guests at the table, and we're not the master of the table. We are servants around the table, and our job is to go and invite people to the table, because the table is a tool designed to welcome people into the kingdom, that they might taste and see that the Lord is good. And when the servants tell him they have gone out to grab these people, the master says, no. Go even further, because there's still space at the table. So he sends them to the highways and the hedges, it says in verse 23, to compel people to come. Meaning, go beyond this town and the community that knows us. Go beyond local roads. Find the highway owned by the Romans, where there are travelers there who know nothing about me and nothing of my home, and invite them to my home and compel them. Compel them can sound forceful, right? Like, debate them into the kingdom. Tell them they're wrong, right into the kingdom. That is not the word. It's not this forceful sense. Compel is to have an irresistible influence. Let them know how beautiful this table is. Let them know how incredible the home is. Let them know how generous and gracious the master is. Let them know that, yes, the master literally means them. That this master longs that they would come to his table, because he has put out the greatest spread they've ever seen. And be such an irresistible influence with the aroma of Christ and the fragrance of his love so rich in your life, that they see something and they wonder and they want to come near. Jesus is inviting us to be servants of irresistible influence and to live lives of such radical hospitality that those far from him would come and taste and see that the Lord is good. See, your life has a calling, and the table is a tool. And as a servant, you're called to go and invite many to come. So what do we do with this? It's a simple story with a spiritual point. What do we do with this? Well, let's flesh it out with an illustration, if you will. One of you, before service began, received an invitation from me. An invitation with the promise to hold on to that invitation, and it would result in a sweet reward. And so the invitation was handed out somewhere over here. Who has that invitation? Wave it high. All right, why don't you come on down and join me at the table? You've been invited to my table today. Yeah, go ahead and welcome her down. She had no idea that this was happening. In fact, no one outside of me had any idea that this was happening this morning. And I promise a sweet reward. And so to entice you to come to the table, I picked up one of these. Oh, you know what this is. If you're unfamiliar with the shape and color of this box, this is a nothing bundt cake. Come on up, because I have something for you. This is a nothing bundt cake, which is like heaven with angel feathers on top of it. This is, have you ever had a nothing bundt cake before? Oh my goodness. This isn't just a nothing bundt cake. This is a snickerdoodle nothing bundt cake. It's like a cinnamon roll combined with cakey goodness. And you're lucky I'm giving it to you. This is just be clear on that. These are some of my favorites. So here's the deal. This is for you, except it's not exactly for you. There's kind of a trick. And so here's the deal. This isn't my cake or my gift to you. This is actually the church's gift to you. They gave this to you. And your job this week is to be a servant. And your job this week is to give this away. Your job this week is to go out with a gift that you did not earn, a gift that you could never have deserved, and to find someone who is in need and to show them the love of our God. So maybe it's someone at work. Maybe there's someone you struggle with at work. They're a Pharisee. They're opposition. And maybe this week you give them a gift that they don't deserve. And you let them know through your radical hospitality that there is a God who sees them and loves them. Maybe there's someone in your neighborhood who's suffering. Yeah? Maybe there's someone who's sick, who's lost their job. Maybe there's someone who feels forgotten. And your job is to go, because this is a tool. Now, you can choose to invite them to your table and share this with them. That would be radical hospitality, and it would be delicious. And so however you choose to do this, whether you want to give it away or whether you want to invite them in and you share this with them, that's your decision to make. But this week, your job is to pray and ask God to give you eyes to see who he might send. See, church, I wish that I could have bought a cake for every single one of you this week. I thought about it, but then I'd have to submit the receipts to that guy over there, and I knew that wouldn't go very well. But the reality is, though you're not receiving a literal cake, every single one of you has received such an incredible, lavish gift from our Father in heaven. A gift that you could not have earned. A gift that you do not deserve. A gift that you had no part in creating. And there was nothing in you that made Jesus look at you and say, that guy deserves a cake. No, God in his great love sent his son, Jesus Christ, for you. And he took the debt and paid the penalty on his own that you might be forgiven and set free when you place your faith in him. And with that great gift, God says to you, and he says to me, that you are not a guest, you're a servant. and we don't hold on to this gift and treat it just as our own. We take this gift and we give it away. And so that's your charge this week. Thank you for letting me embarrass you up on stage. Would you thank her? Church, think of it as though I gave you a cake this week. And your charge this week is to go out and live with radical hospitality. What is it that you have in your life that you can share? Maybe there's a coworker who's struggling. You can buy them lunch. Maybe there's a coworker who's having a hard time. Bring them a coffee. Ask the Lord, Lord, would you give me eyes to see those who are in need? And would you give me the courage to be the hands and feet of Jesus and live as a faithful presence right where I already am, that through my kindness, they might see your goodness. And so church, as we close, can we just take up a posture that I've often taught us? Arms out, hands open. It is the posture of surrender. And might we just offer to Jesus this week our lives and our tables and our everything, asking him to use us in his kingdom. Pray with me. Father God, we are your servants. Our lives are yours. Our jobs, our careers, they come from you. Our homes were given to us by you. Father, none of this we deserve or have earned. And so, Father, would you send us out this week with eyes to see and the heart like Jesus? Father, that we might be the hands and feet to your children, those who are in need. Father God, use us. And through your love expressed in our obedience, might you, Father, show them your grace and your goodness as they see Jesus in us. Father, open doors this week and give us courage to walk through them and even present the gospel as we are able. We ask it in Jesus' holy, matchless name. And all God's people said, amen.
If you want to talk to someone about a decision you've made, or let us know how God is moving through these messages, visit nebc.ch/contact. Be sure to stay connected with us throughout the week on social media or by subscribing to this weekly podcast. You can always stay up to date with information about what's going on here at Northeast by visiting nebc.ch/mobile or by subscribing to the Northeast News, our periodic newsletter that comes to your inbox to keep you in the know. Thanks for listening to today's message, and we hope that you join us as we continue to make disciples who pursue Jesus fully and love others deeply.